Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. My topic of presentation is literary approaches. Critical approaches to literature or literary theories. Literary approaches focus on two things. First, how do we study literature? And secondly, how do viewpoint and bias affect our perception of reality? Critical approaches are different perspectives or different lens we consider when looking at the piece of literature. They seek to give us answers of questions like what do we read, why do we read, and how do we read, and also help us in interpreting literature. Basic literary approaches are the reader response criticism, feminist criticism, psychological or psychoanalytical criticism, sociological criticism, biographical criticism, and new historicist criticism. Sociological criticism has two sub branches: feminist or gender criticism, and second, the Marxist criticism. First, the reader response approach. The reader response approach asserts that a great deal of meaning in a text lies with how the reader responds to it. It focuses on the act of reading and how it affects our perception of meaning in a text. Means, how do we feel at the beginning versus the end of a text? It deals more with the process of creating meaning and experiencing a text as we read. According to reader response theorists, a text is an experience, not an object. According to them, the text is a living thing that lives in the reader's imagination. The important ideas in reader response approach are: first, an individual reader's interpretation usually changes over time. Secondly, readers from different generation and different time period interpret a text differently. Ultimately, the reader response theory deals with how reader feels after reading a text and how he interprets the text. Second approach, the formalist approach. Formalist criticism emphasizes the form of literary works to determine its meaning, focusing on literary elements and how they work to create meaning. It examines a text as independent from its time period, social setting, and author's background. According to formalists, a text is an independent entity. The formalists focus on close reading of text and analysis of the effects of literary elements and techniques on the text. The major principles of formalism are: first, a literary text exists independent of any particular reader and, in a sense, has a fixed meaning. Secondly, the greatest literary texts are timeless and universal. The third approach is the psychological or psychoanalytical approach. Psychological criticism views a text as revelation of its author mind and personality. It is based on the work of Sigmund Freud, a famous psychologist. The psychological approach focuses on the hidden motivation of literary characters. It also looks at literary characters as a reflection of the writer. The fourth approach is the sociological approach. Sociological criticism argues that social context, social environment, and setting must be considered when analyzing a text. Sociological approach focuses on the values of a society and how those values and views are reflected in a text. It emphasizes the economic, political, and cultural issues within literary text. The core belief of sociological theory is that literature is a reflection of its society. The sub branch of sociological approach. First, the Marxist approach. Marxist criticism emphasizes economic and social conditions. It is based on the political theory of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. It concerned with the understanding of role of power, politics, and money in literary text. Marxist criticism examines literature to see how it reflects, in a way, first, in which dominant groups, typically the majority group, exploits the subordinate groups, the minority. And secondly, the way in which people became alienated from one another through power, money, and politics. Second sub branch of sociological approach is the feminist approach. Feminist criticism is concerned with the role, position, and influence of women in a literary text. The feminist approach asserts that most literature throughout time has been written by men for men. It examines the way that the female consciousness is depicted by both male and female writers. The basic principles of feminist criticism are: first, human civilization is patriarchal, means man dominated. Second, the concepts of gender are mainly cultural ideas created by patriarchal societies, means gender difference is socially constructed and constructed by man dominant societies. Third, patriarchal ideas pervades literature. Fourth, most literature throughout time has been gender biased. Fifth, biographical approach. Biographical criticism argues that we must take author's life and background into account when we study a text. By taking author's life and background while studying a text benefits us in following way. First, facts about author's experience can help readers to decide how to interpret the text. Secondly, a reader can better appreciate a text by knowing that writers struggle or difficulties in creating text. Third, a reader can understand a writer's preoccupation by studying the way they apply and modify their own life experiences in their work. The sixth approach is the new historicist approach. The new historicist criticism argues that every literary work is the product of its time and its world. The new historicism provides background information necessary to understand how literary texts were perceived in their time. It shows how the literary texts reflect ideas and attitudes of the time in which they were written. The new critics often compare the language in contemporary documents and literary texts to reveal cultural assumptions and values in the text. We student of literature, what we do is that we should never look at a text strictly from one standpoint or another by ignoring all other views. That is antithetical to what we are trying to do. We should always keep our focus on the text and use these critical approaches to clarify our understanding of a text and develop an interpretation of it. Thank you.